All right, folks, here we are. Thank you for joining me. You are here to see what you can learn from Silly Putty, the Slinky, and Post-its so that you can gain a competitive advantage for your company. I am Aaron Schmuckler, CEO, trainer, company culture engineer at the Yes Works. And, the Silly Putty, the Slinky, the Post-it, they all have something very specific in common. Uh, and I believe that there is something that we can learn also from what they have in common. These are three very successful products. They've been around, all three of these, for a very long time, and they are still selling very well. So, Silly Putty. Silly Putty was, some people would say, invented. Other people would say discovered in 1943. Now, it was absolutely invented. It's not a natural occurring product. But here's why some people say it was discovered. Silly Putty was a failed rubber substitute. World War II, the United States needs rubber to make boots for soldiers and to make rubber airplane tires. And there is a worldwide rubber shortage. All kinds of materials for the war effort are rare, scarce, hard to find. So the government asked various companies to try to devise a substitute for rubber that they could use for making boots and airplane tires. Silly Putty is very clearly none of those things. However, Silly Putty is incredibly fun. I don't know about you, but I loved Silly Putty as a kid, and I still love Silly Putty. You give me a wad of Silly Putty, and I will find lots of fun stretching it and pressing it onto newsprint to get that image to come off and creating bubbles and popping it. So Silly Putty is a failed rubber substitute. The Slinky, the Slinky also 1943. This is a big year for accidental toys. The Slinky was a failed attempt to find a spring that would stabilize some ship's instruments on boats that are going through waves and things like that, wanting to stabilize some of the sensitive instruments in those boats. The inventor accidentally knocked this, one of the springs he was using to try to devise these stabilizers, knocked it off the shelf and watched it do its kind of incredible, now widely known slinky thing. It stepped slinkily from one object to the next on its way down. And he identified that that might be useful. And the Post-it. The Post-it is the only one of the things that's on this list that is not a toy. But it is not. Neither was the Silly Putty and the Slinky were not intended to be toys. So in some ways, the Post-it is right there alongside these as a failed industrial invention. The Post-it's inventor was trying to create a super strong adhesive, a stronger, more potent adhesive. And what he ended up with was this incredibly weak adhesive that could be adhered and removed and re-adhered. And to his credit, he considered this interesting. He considered this quality of the adhesive that he created interesting. The light readherent properties that this adhesive had. He considered it interesting, though he did not have a solution for the problem right away. So, what do all these things have in common? Well, clearly, they all are accidental inventions. They are all of them failed inventions that the inventor or someone in their environment thought might be useful, might have utility other than the intended utility. So when we work with companies to create a culture where people and profits both rise, one of the principles that we bring to the folks that we are teaching is this principle, yay for failing. Now, Some folks resist this. In fact, recently I was speaking to a leader who said that during COVID, they went too far in compassion during COVID and they needed to claw back some of that compassion. And I would argue that having high standards and requiring that people meet those standards is not contradictory with yay for failing. In fact, yay for failing is prerequisite to effectively holding people to a high standard. And so, yay for failing is not about tolerating mediocrity. That said, an environment in which people can try something, discover that it doesn't work, still feel good about themselves and about the ways in which they've spent their time, about the efforts that they've made. That kind of environment, that kind of yay for failing environment is prerequisite to what happened that made all of these failures great successes, which is that because the people involved in them were not unwilling, were not down on themselves, were not crushed by the fact that these attempts failed. That is what allowed them to see the potential of a goopy rubber substitute that would never substitute for rubber. The opportunity to see that as a plaything, the opportunity to see the Slinky, this failed ship stabilizer, as a plaything, the opportunity to see the Post-it as a not just a failed strong adhesive, but as an interesting weak adhesive. All of those require that people are not trying to hide, gloss over their failures, not punishing themselves for those failures. So, also in a yay for failing environment, people are willing to be transparent. They're willing to share their failures and talk about them. They're willing to be obvious and say, "Look at this goop that I created. This moldable, malleable putty that I've created out of my attempt to create a rubber substitute." And what happens when someone is being obvious that way is that there is an opportunity for others to be obvious right back. What's obvious to me is not necessarily what's obvious to you, and what's obvious to you is not necessarily what's obvious to me. And so what can we learn from the story of Silly Putty? Well, the inventor didn't sweep this failure under the rug. Instead, he shared it with others, who shared it with others, who shared it with others, and it became an absolutely incredibly high selling toy. Uh, Interestingly, the fellow who knocked the Slinky off the shelf and found its interesting property of flipping over itself and in this slinky fashion moving, shared this with his wife, and it was together. She is the one who named it the Slinky. With a different name, who knows whether it would have done as well as it did. In fact, Silly Putty was not initially called Silly Putty. It was called Nutty Putty, and it didn't do nearly as well with that name as it did with the name Silly Putty, which other people applied it to it. The fellow at 3M who invented this weak adhesive while he was trying to invent a strong adhesive, and this is probably the strongest example of being obvious with others so that they can in turn be obvious with you. He considered this weak adhesive interesting. He didn't know what to do with it. He simply considered it interesting. And so he shared, though it was his job to create a strong adhesive and he failed to do that, he shared this interesting weak adhesive with his colleagues. And one of his colleagues, I don't remember how long, quite some time after inventor number one, shared this weak adhesive with his colleague. This colleague was at a band rehearsal or something, or orchestra rehearsal, and trying to put little bookmarks, little markers in his score so that he could call his attention to aspects of the score as he was rehearsing with the orchestra. And he was frustrated by how often they would fall out, or and therefore he would lose his place. And it just occurred to him what about that weak adhesive that my colleagues shared with me? And so they put their heads together and they created the first Post-its, little flags that he could stick into his score. And they thought, my, isn't this interesting? And still, the Post-it, as we understand it and as we use it, was not yet born, although I do have flags. There we go. There's one, right? So we do have Post-it flags. It wasn't until they started putting notes around the office to one another and to their colleagues, they realized, oh, we can put this on a larger piece of paper and write something on it. And the real marketable, the incredible Post-it that all of us know and most of us love was born in stages through a collaborative process. So what can we learn from Silly Putty, from the Slinky, from the Post-its? It's go ahead and fail. Permission to fail. Brent, thank you. Brent says permission to fail is a prerequisite to having very high standards for teams. Makes a lot of sense to me. I'm sorry, you must have put that up there earlier and I didn't see it at first. So here we are with people in an environment where they feel free to share. And so this is a good transition, Brent, into this idea that it takes that environment where failure is welcome, where you are encouraged to take risks and not always have those risks pay off, or certainly not immediately pay off, for people to be willing to be transparent with what they've discovered, with what they've learned. And so everybody can learn from the experience that that person has had. And your failures can even turn out to be fortunate. If you get multiple minds on the same interesting adhesive over time and iteratively, you end up with the Post-it, right? I've got multiple packs of these Post-its on my desk because they are so incredibly useful. Decades later, we still have the Post-it. And when was this adhesive invented? If I remember correctly, it was in the late 60s or the early 70s that the Post-it, that weak adhesive, was discovered in an attempt to create a strong adhesive. At the S-Works, we like to say that innovation isn't something that you do, it's something that happens when the conditions are right. And we love working with teams to help them create the right conditions for innovation to happen inevitably, so that your company has a culture of innovation, which is undoubtedly an unfair strategic advantage in the marketplace. If you have a culture of innovation and problem solving, then you have your future. If you don't have a culture of innovation and problem solving, if you aren't innovating, as the adage goes, innovate or die. If you are standing still, someone else in your market is catching up to you and is just about to pass you by. So if we can help you to cultivate the conditions in your company where innovation and problem solving are inevitable, we'd love to talk with you about how that happens and how we've done it for others. Look us up at theyesworks.com. Hope this exploration of what you can learn from Silly Putty, the Slinky, and the Post-it has been useful to you. It's been fun for me to share with you. All right.